Hello and welcome to CS230. This is Lecture 6, Lesson 2. And we saw a little bit about manipulating arrays and with the map method, and we can use some other methods to do this as well. We can just use our for each and loop and do all that kind of stuff. So what I wanted to do is show you how we might start generating HTML from the data that we have in a database. So for example, we saw earlier in the lectures that we had this little database here, which was essentially a base class's object, and it contained the stats for each of the Dungeons and Dragons primary character classes. So barbarians, bards, druids, fighters, etc., etc., etc. And it doesn't matter if you don't play Dungeons and Dragons. The point is that we can structure the data in this particular way. I've just commented out the character class here in each of these objects because we don't really need it given the fact that we have the barbarian. So that's the only difference between the lectures we've seen so far. What I'd like to be able to do is I'd like to be able to generate something that like this list. This is an unordered list, so we make it with UL and the LI elements, and we'd like to be able to say get from this list into this printable list. So we have the various pieces of detail, and we see how to make that happen. So it's not the best way, but to look at those data. But what would be much more useful for us, I guess, is if we had something like where we had a drop-down menu that we create using the selection list here, and then depending on which we select, it updates some accompanying list with the actual details. So we don't see the full list, but if we're only interested in druids, then we might find we click a select down selection or bards, we select that, and we get the update here for that. So I'm going to show you how to do that. It's fairly straightforward. It's not trivial, a lot of coding going on, but if I show you, if I work through show you my worked example, you get a sense of how to make this happen. So let's go to the example first. Okay, I think it's called demo 2, yeah. So this is the one that we did in class. The first example is we just clicked a button to generate the list from the example that we had. And if we go back to the data, we can see the data here on this side here. So our base classes, we started with this object. You know, it's an object because it's got chain brackets here, and it closes with a chain bracket. And inside that object, there are other objects, and they're separated by commas. Okay, so we're able to get the barbarian, the bard, druid, and fighter, and there are more, of course. But not everybody's interested in Dungeons and Dragons, so I won't bore you with all the details. Okay, but what's much more fun for us is if I show the class stats here, then what's happened is I've taken this list over on the left, and now I've generated this nice little list here, okay, which is kind of fun. Okay, and as I change the various items, I get the update here. So in other words, it takes the contents of each one and displays it. So how do I do that? How do I make that happen? Well, the approach to do this really is to have two elements. So we have this dynamically generated, and it is dynamically generated because if you look, we don't see them initially. I click this button to actually generate this list dynamically with JavaScript from my data, and then it also generated the content that fills this. So we first and foremost, we kind of have these hidden areas for the selection box, and we have hidden area for the unordered list where it's going to appear. And then we use JavaScript to generate this list, this selection unit, and also this stuff here. So we basically, when I click this button here, it generates everything, okay? And then we can use this to navigate. So what's happening is that we can see that we have an onChange event here. So when I'm changing this gets updated based on the change that happened in this list. So it also means that we have to write this onChange function in this method. So we're dynamically creating this particular element with JavaScript because it doesn't exist initially. And we can look at the code for this in demo 2 and see that. We just go down and have a peek. If we go demo 2, we go down and we'll see that initially we just have a space placeholders here. Somewhere to hold the select, the drop down, and somewhere to hold the unordered list. They don't exist. So when we generate this list over here, and we select it, then the change event that's happening when we select makes this happen here, but we don't have an onChange because anywhere here, as part of the code, So we have to write an onChange function or method that attach that method to it. And we saw that in class, that you could do that yesterday, and I'm just showing you how to make it happen. Okay, so let's go up and have a look at our data again. Okay, so the data here then is kind of nice. We start with the barbarian, bard, druid, fighter. They're in an array. Oops, is this yeah, they're here. They're not actually in an array. They're still in an object here. Okay, so I'm iterating over the classes. So I'm using the for function to loop over all of these objects. Okay, so I'm picking out the key, the barbarian, the whatever it is, the druid, the fighter, and then I'm getting access to an individual. And once I have that property, and I'm sure that property exists, because we want to be sure that the key actually exists and the key has some values. So we're just being careful of that. Then we're generating the list dynamically. So we start off with a list, and then this is fairly straightforward. We saw this in lectures, and we're able to access the various attributes and elements, build a list, close the unordered list, and update the element. And that's this one over here on the right. So that's the first one. Okay. So now we want to do things slightly differently. You can see that this is the function for the second one. So this time we're starting off, we want to build a class. We want to build a selection item. So we're saying we want to select a selection box for those classes. Then we iterate over all the classes. Again, we iterate over the classes. So we pick out the class, and for each class then we want to see what the value is. So the value, okay, and the trick here is that we're going to put the contents of this properties into the value of the drop-down list, separated by commas, and then we write a function that when we change here down here, we process the value that's selected and convert the comma separated list into an unordered list. So that's okay. So a comma separated string into an unordered list. Okay, so we start off with our value here, and when we build up the value, so that in other words, we take all of the elements in here, we iterate over all the properties in the selected object, and we take their values and we separate them by commas. We just make a big string from those. And so, you know, if it was so this piece here, you know, wisdom D8 intelligence, wisdom becomes wisdom comma D8 comma intelligence comma wisdom. That's a string. It iterates over it quite nicely here, and when the way it happens is we sometimes we can see that that we get this extra comma, so we just strip that off at the end. Then we close the value string as part of select. We close that option, and then when we're done with all of the various options, we have a select, and that's it. It generates it nicely. I mean, it's not too difficult to do. We could probably alert this. Could we? We could just we could alert. Just to see it. We'll run this. Okay, and we can see what's been generated. We can see all the options are generated nicely in there. So it displays it properly. Okay, so we'll get rid of that. We don't want to have this the whole time. Okay. Now we update the placeholder. So we generate this list, and we're calling it. We called it, by the way, we called it new list. The select item, we call it new list. So we dynamically generated this, so we can find it now. So we find it. We find an ID for the class stats, and we know that's something that's generating and waiting already. So we then set an onChange function. So we make an unordered list from the comma separated string that we had in there. And this is a really short and neat way to do this. Okay, we're just using a replace method on the string as we loop over the values. And instead of having commas, we remove the comma and replaced it with the element separate, wrapped around with list and close list. And then we close that, and then we update the contents of the string. It's easy to do, really is straightforward. We just look at this, and that's how we make that happen. Okay, now what's wrong? We just have a look at the problem we had with this. I found when I was developing this. So I'll start it again. Now, if you notice that by default, when I generated this list, Barbarian was selected, but we didn't get the details. So I have to simulate doing this. Okay, I have to simulate the change to the list. So what I do is this piece of code down here, I select the first item in the list that I've generated, and then I simulate a change, or kick off a change event, okay, to onChange right as it's displayed. So I'll save this, reload, and now we see that we get what we want. So it's kind of nice here. Okay, so that's it. It's not very complex. It's iterating over code using a lot of for variables, iterating over the objects, getting the keys and values, playing with them, manipulating them with string handling, replacing strings with some other strings, doing it in order, building strings, and then writing strings to contents. Not too complex, but very tedious, okay? And I'm sure you get there with a little bit of practice. Anyway, I'm giving all of my examples. They're all there. You can look at the code, you can change the code, and you're quite welcome to do so and learn something for yourself. Thank you very much for watching.